Okay, well, looks like we're going to get started. So good morning, and thank you all for joining us this morning for the Electric Vehicles and Related Infrastructure on Statewide Contract webinar. My name is Jennifer Forsey. I'm a local government account manager with Operational Services Division. And we're happy to welcome cities and towns from around Massachusetts today for a discussion on how municipal buyers can enjoy the benefits offered through VEH 110 and VEH 102, electric vehicles and related infrastructure. We'll conclude today's session with a 10-minute question and answer period. And we're also going to post a link to a brief survey in the chat. It should only take 1 minute to complete 5 short questions. And please take a moment at the end of today's presentation to send us your feedback. It is very much appreciated. But before we begin the presentation, I do have a few housekeeping items to share with you. First, today's presentation is being recorded. Please keep your cameras off and audio on mute during the presentation, and you'll be able to submit your questions via the chat feature. We'll respond to the questions at the end of today's presentation. We'll also forward a copy of this presentation and a link to today's recording to all attendees. Joining me today are Tim Kennedy, Director of Strategic Sourcing Services, and Michelle Broussard, who comes to OSD with years of experience in alternative fuel programs. Next slide. We'll kick off today's presentation with supply chain updates, and then we'll transition over to the 2 statewide contracts that we'll be highlighting: VEH 110, light and medium duty vehicles, and VEH 102, advanced vehicle technology, equipment, supplies, and services. We'll review the benefits of leveraging these 2 contracts with a brief discussion of environmental and sustainability considerations. And then we'll conclude the presentation with a list of contract resources. And as I mentioned earlier, we will close with a question and answer period. We'll try to get to as many questions as time allows. Now I'd like to turn it over to Tim Kennedy, who'll begin the presentation with a review of supply chain updates.
Thank you, Jen. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Hopefully you'll find a lot of useful information during today's webinar. First, I wanted to start off with some of the good news. So there have been some good improvements in terms of the supply chain for electric vehicles and the supporting infrastructure items such as charging stations. It's not perfect yet, but it is getting better. And you can see on this slide a number of quotes and takeaways from recent articles in the Wall Street Journal and other publications that are indicating or reporting that the supply chain is improving. Electric vehicles now are coming in with additional discounts, whereas a few months ago there was a very high premium on EVs. Demand is softening, unsold models are piling up on dealer lots, and that's good news for you, the buyer, because EVs on average are more expensive than the internal combustion engine equivalent, and any model that sits on a dealer's lot costs that dealer money. So the EVs in particular are putting pressure on the dealers to move them out. So you should be able to take advantage of that in your discussions with the vendors and setting price. The other big piece of information that I know is of great concern to a lot of our users is what about charging station infrastructure? Yes, you probably are going to need to consider installing some charging stations yourselves, but don't forget to look around in your community, your region, your territory that your users are going to be traveling in to see what the status is currently and soon to be regarding charging stations. There are a lot of electric utilities that are running really aggressive programs to add electrical service contractors to be able to connect lots to the electrical infrastructure in case those lot owners want to install charging stations. So not only will that help you, but it'll help all the other lot owners in your region or your territory. And in that vein, you want to pay attention to what's going on with those private parking lot owners. So for example, I do know that at Gillette Stadium, there are currently 6 charging stations for EVs around Patriot Place in the stadium. Those are open 24/7. And clearly the stadium is hoping that, and the store owners are hoping that those will be an added incentive for people to come visit the shop. So there's an incentive for them. But they're also gauging that usage and considering when and how many additional charging stations to add. So factor that into your decision making as you're looking at how quickly to roll out your vehicle conversions, as well as how many and when to roll out your charging stations. And I do want to make the extra point that we have added multiple charging station brands to our fuel card, which is available under statewide contract VEH 117. So keep checking that contract user guide for updates regarding which brands are available. Your users currently carrying fuel cards will just need to obtain a key fob that is associated with the card in order to be able to use those charging stations. Next slide, please. And here are a few tips that you might want to make use of as you're going through the process of identifying your needs, what types of vendors you want to work with, etc. The field is very much in a state of flux. We are working, as I said before, with our vendors on statewide contract to add additional models and brands, manufacturer brands from our dealers for the vehicles, as well as for the charging stations. So keep checking back with the OSD website on our contract user guides, but then also double check with the vendors. There may be something in the works with the vendors, between the vendor and OSD, that has not quite made it to the contract user guide. So keep in close contact with the vendors when you're putting together your plans and your requests for quotes. And when you're generating those requests for quotes, consider alternative vehicle types. We have a number of instances where buyers have gone into a dealership seeking a specific model and brand, and then the dealers have made them aware of alternative brands that they also happen to have on the lot that could meet the need. And the buyer has been able to obtain vehicles sooner than they would have if they stuck with that specific model or brand. You do want to avoid getting too specific with trim packages and option packages, and consider using the upfitters that we have available on the statewide contracts to be able to get the vehicle you need, perhaps missing some of those options, which can then be added after delivery via the upfitters. That could also speed up your ability to get those vehicles in service. And always consider, if you're really stuck, look at the advanced technology options available under VEH 102, where we do have vendors that can provide conversions to EV or hybrid models and idle reduction technologies. The last 3 bullets on this slide, I would kind of lump under do your homework. So because of the state of flux in the market, you want to be very careful about some of the newer EV brand manufacturers. There's been a lot of consolidation. The pricing pressures I mentioned on the earlier slide are significantly impacting some of the newer startups whose financing isn't quite as robust as you might expect from the big 3 automakers. So be careful in terms of choosing the brands. Make sure that the vehicle brand and type that you're looking at is supported by available charging stations, again, in your territory or in your region. And stay in contact with those local businesses and lot owners to see what they're planning. I know of several gas station chains that are adding electric vehicle charging stations that will be publicly available across the Southeast, and that activity seems to be growing here in the Northeast as well. Next slide, please. So here I just wanted to give you quick summary information on VEH 110, which is our light and medium duty statewide contract for vehicles. And we have updated the request for quote form. You don't necessarily have to use the form. It's highly recommended, but it's not mandatory. But even if you decide to use your own RFQ format, I'd advise you to take a look at our RFQ form. There may be some items called out there that you haven't considered that you might want to include in your form, just to make sure that all the corners of the contract, so to speak, between you and the vendor are tacked down and you're getting exactly what you're expecting to get. We've also enhanced the vehicle list, which is attached to the contract and available via link in the contract user guide. So take advantage of that. But again, as I mentioned on the prior slide, nothing can substitute for being in direct contact with the vendors because of the fluid nature of the offerings. Next slide, please. So here's a high-level overview of the contract categories available under the contract, under VEH 110. Those in green text are EVs, and we're working with the manufacturers and the vendors to obtain electric vehicles under the other categories as well. There are a number of vendors that on this contract that have vehicles available in other categories that they were not originally awarded. We have invited them to propose those additions so that we'll be rolling out those additions if they can satisfy our requirements for having manufacturer authorization, et cetera, et cetera. So keep referring back to the contract user guide regarding changes in the vendor offerings here. Next slide, please. And here's just a very quick summary on what's available, what the brands were at the time this slide was created. Again, as I mentioned, this is a fairly fluid space, and we are in the process of adding additional brands from different vendors that are on the contract. But here's a quick summary of those brands available by the different vendors that we have today. And just double check that. And again, refer to the vendor itself to make sure that you're getting the most recent information before you issue your RFQ or your PO, certainly. And then next slide, please. And we do have some successes. If you haven't seen it, please refer to OSD's By the Way edition. There's an article in there regarding a success story with the city of Boston, and their transactions with one of our electric bus vendors and how they were able to leverage the contract to get the buses they needed. And there are other articles of interest and relevance to EV purchasing. In addition, we are also inviting vendors on our professional services contracts to add capabilities regarding supporting you, the buyer, in terms of creating or developing your strategies for electrification, as well as your strategies for exactly where to roll out and implement charging stations, et cetera. And now I'd like to turn it over to Michelle Broussard, who will be talking about VEH 102.
Thanks, Tim. So Tim just took us nicely through the vehicle contracts. I'm going to move us into the space of infrastructure and conversions with the statewide contract VEH 102. So as Jen mentioned, VEH 102 is the contract for advanced vehicle technology equipment, supplies, and services. And it's the primary contract for acquiring advanced vehicles and alternative fuel transportation equipment. Contract terms run from October of this year till 2025 without current renewal or extension options. And there are 3 categories. Category 1, charging stations, hardware, software, and ancillary services. Category 2 is idle reduction for light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty vehicles and heavy duty equipment. And category 3 is aftermarket conversion technologies for all vehicle categories. Next slide, please. Whoops. Okay. So category 1, charging stations, hardware, software, and ancillary services. What I first want to point out here is that's not actually the name of the category. So if you're looking it up that way, you're not going to see it quite that way. Charging station is what we use for the vernacular of electric vehicle supply equipment. I'm going to refer to it as EVSE. And EVSE consists actually of the meter, the station, and the connecting cables. So it's a bit more than just a charging station, which is a small distinction, but a pretty large chasm of common misunderstanding. If you hear EVSE, if you hear me refer to it or other people refer to it or see it referred to in the contract, you're welcome to use the words charging station. An EV management system is an end-to-end software solution for managing EV charging operations like billing, energy management, EV driver management, fleet management, lots of management. And the EVSC hardware supplies the electricity to an electric vehicle, and software allows operators to manage and optimize EV charging operations. Next slide, please. This slide may look simple, but I have a lot to say about it. First, I'd like to point out that battery size is denoted in kilowatt hours, kWh, but charging speeds are denoted in kilowatts, kW. So one measures size and one measures flow. Kilowatt hours would be the size of your tank, and kilowatt is how quickly you can get the electricity into it. Level 1 EV charging, the average time it takes to charge a mid-sized car will be about 19 hours, and you typically get a range of 3 to 7 miles per hour of charge. Level 1 EV charging, while there are some stations, you're clearly not going to find very many on VH 102, and that's because you can simply plug your car into the wall. You get a level 1 charge. Level 2 charging, the average time it takes to charge a mid-size EV is between 2 hours and 6 hours, with a typical range per hour being between 15 and 35. The timing is determined both by the rate at which the station can dispense the electricity, as well as the rate your car can accept the electricity. So, for example, Level 2 charging has a wide range of kilowatt power options. If you use one of the lower end, about 7.5 kilowatts, it's going to add about 25 miles of range for in an hour. If you scoot up to 11 kilowatts, you're going to add about 35 miles of range. 22 kilowatts will add about 75 miles of range. So you have to note, if you're putting in stations yourself, what speed your level 2 charging station is actually dispensing at. And then there's level 3 charging, what we call direct current fast charging, or DCFC. And the average time it takes to charge a mid-size car DCFC lies somewhere between 15 minutes and an hour. That typical range per hour can be up to 120 plus miles. So level 2 you can think of as destination charging, where you're going to park your car somewhere and you're going to refuel at that point where you're having a burger or you're watching a movie. Whereas level 3 charging is more for moving long corridors. So if you're taking a longer trip and you have your kids with you and you can't really stop for 5 hours, you want to be able to charge it more quickly. And DCFC is usually located where there's some sort of amenities so you can get out and grab a coffee and stretch your legs. Next slide, please. Category 2, we've got idle reduction, which we mentioned was for light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty vehicles and heavy duty equipment. Idling can lead, as you probably can guess, to a waste of fuel, increased emissions, and unnecessary wear and tear on the engine. So I'll give some equipment examples on the next slide, but for now, just note that pricing submitted by the vendors should include installation where appropriate, and that products offered for heavy duty vehicles needs to be EPA or DOE certified. Next slide, please. Here are some examples that I just alluded to. You can take a peek at, but I'm going to speak over them to talk about some benefits here. Idle reduction technology, or IRT, refers to various methods and devices that minimize your unnecessary idling time. So when a vehicle's engine is running, but the vehicle is not moving, we consider it idling. Some benefits of IRT: reduced fuel consumption. Idling can waste a significant amount of fuel. The DEA says that a typical passenger vehicle idles for about 15 minutes a day, which wastes about 2 gallons of fuel per year, which does not sound like a heck of a lot. But now think about looking at an entire fleet of larger vehicles. By using IRT, businesses and government agencies and munis can all save money on fuel costs. We reduce emissions. Idling contributes to air pollution. According to the EPA, idling vehicles emit about 20 pounds, of carbon dioxide per gallon of fuel burnt. So by using IRT, we're helping to improve air quality. We've got reduced engine wear and tear, because idling can damage a vehicle's engine. The constant stop and start motion of idling can cause wear and tear on engine components. And by using IRT, we can extend the life of our vehicles and save money on maintenance costs. Improve driver comfort as well. IRT can keep a cab warm in the winter and cool in the summer without having to run the vehicle. Next slide, please. Category 3, aftermarket conversion technologies, which applies to all vehicle categories. Retrofits apply to vehicles already in service and on the road, and upfits apply to new vehicles upfit at the time of purchase. Next slide, please. So there are a number of benefits to aftermarket vehicle conversions. Again, we see reduced fuel costs, because here we're talking about heavier duty vehicles. So we're not just talking about electrification. We're talking about CNG and propane, hybrid hydraulic systems, things beyond just EVs. These fuels, CNG and propane, are typically less expensive than gas, so converting a vehicle to run on these can certainly save money on fuel costs. Again, improved emissions. Alternative fuels like CNG and propane and electricity produce lower emissions than gas does, so we can help reduce air pollution. And sometimes you can extend range. Where EVs have a limited range, you can sometimes convert a gas vehicle to a hybrid electric vehicle and extend its range, sometimes called an extended range vehicle. So there are also a number of challenges associated with aftermarket vehicle conversions, including costs. They can be quite costly to convert a vehicle at this point in time. Range, as we mentioned, if you want to start by going EV, you may be limiting your range, and that may be inappropriate in some driving instances. And availability. Aftermarket conversion kits and companies are not always available for all vehicles. Very nascent market. Keep your eye on it. There's a lot to be had here for fleets. Next slide, please. Here are some incentive programs designed to reduce emissions in Massachusetts by increasing the use primarily of medium duty and heavy duty on-road electric and non-diesel vehicles. These programs are available to munis, state agencies, and public higher ed. Programs in generally may not be combined, but check specifically on each program for that. And competitive grants may also be available through green communities. Next slide, please. The Leading by Example group within the Department of Energy Resources is an excellent resource for municipalities to contact for info on these contracts and other environmental goals. They provide quick guides on what vehicles will become available in this space, guidance for decision making, planning, and many other tools and resources. Next slide, please. Here we've provided some resources for munis interested in several grant programs that will help support fleet electrification efforts. Next slide, please. From here, thanks. I'm going to hand it back to Jen for takeaways of today. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. And thank you, Tim and Michelle, for a great overview of VEH 110 and VEH 102. Just to sum up today's content, we all know electrifying municipal fleets is underway. Cities and towns are just starting to plan and actively having conversations around EVs, including school buses. And when it comes to purchasing, Tim Kennedy gave us 8 terrific tips. One of those tips that sticks out in my mind was the importance of working closely with the vendors on product availability and delivery timing. OSD continues to keep a finger on the pulse of city and town EV needs. Just this week, the local government team, which includes Jackie Needham, Patricia Burke, and myself, conducted a temperature check with our municipal clients. We went out to 25 cities and towns and found that many of them are in the EV and infrastructure planning stage. Some cities and towns are leveraging our professional services contract vendors in conjunction with the VEH vendors listed on our contracts to find solutions. We're also working closely with the Clean Energy Commission and green communities to strengthen our offerings and reach. And finally, I do want to mention that we have a VEH flyer that's an excellent resource and contains much of the information that you heard here today. Next slide, please. The most up-to-date information for both contracts, VEH 110 and VEH 102, can be found in the contract user guides, which are linked on this slide. The user guides have all of the pertinent information, like for buyers, like contract category descriptions, steps and links to job aids for purchasing on contract, all contract documents, awarded vendor, and pricing. And buyers should visit mass.gov/OSD or the Combi's landing page for a list of the contract user guides and their links, as they're updated often. And we don't recommend downloading these and saving them, as they do change. So you always want to look online for these user guides. Kelly Thompson Clark is the current OSD contract manager for both contracts and can be contacted for any related inquiries. And she's also on this call and will help answer any questions you might have during the Q&A session. Next slide. As a member of the local government team, we are committed to your success. We'll consult with you and listen to where you're looking to make improvements. And we're also available to work with your buyers to create a customized class that is geared to your own specific needs. It would welcome the opportunity to share best practices and strategies, or even speak at your next meeting or conference. And hopefully you'll be able to stop by the OSD booth at the MMA trade show on January 19th, being held at the Heinz Convention Center in Boston. Next slide. There are also several additional resources available to you and your departments. And here's a list with hyperlinks for easy access. I always like to tell my clients, if it takes you more than 5 minutes to find what you're looking for in Combis, or if you can't locate a contract for a specific item or service, please reach out to the help desk. They really are your phone or friend. And they're available from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 days a week. I'm sure many of you at one time or another have taken the opportunity to speak to them, but I hear over and over again how knowledgeable and helpful they are. Next slide. As we mentioned, we do have a brief survey, and we hope you'll just take a few minutes before we end the session today to just complete 5 short questions. It truly does assist us in not only moving forward with additional webinars, but it also helps us kind of just become better at what we want to do, which is to assist you. Next slide. Now it's the question and answer portion, and I'm going to turn it over to Miriam Stein, who will read the questions. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have had a few questions posted in the chat, and our team has been busy responding to some of those. But we have some additional questions that were sent in advance, and let's take a look at some of those. So one in particular was about police patrol electric vehicles and whether or not they're included in the contract. Tim, would you want to speak to that, or would that be Kelly?
I'm willing to speak to that. They are available if the vendors are offering them. I don't know if we have anything currently available. I want to defer to Kelly because she's been very busy with that team.
Sure. Sorry, my mute was still on. So the answer to that question is obviously the primary makers of those vehicles right now are Ford, Chevy, and I think Dodge has got some as well. But the best thing to do is to check with our vendors that do offer that category of police pursuit vehicles, or PPV, as well as our specialty pursuit vehicles under one additional category. I just actually had a meeting yesterday with one of the large motor groups that's part of 110 on a number of the categories that they fall into. So the best thing would be to check with the vendors that are in that category to make sure that they have what you're looking for, as well as if there are any specific questions that you have about certain vehicles on that. So they definitely are available. It's just a matter of knowing what the lead time is, because the more mandatory items or specialty items you have on a vehicle, the longer the lead time will be. And I realize that PPV vehicles obviously have a lot of specialty items, but there's even some accessories, so to speak, and upfitting that needs to be done to some of those vehicles. So the best thing to do is to check with the vendors and make sure that you know exactly what the lead time is.
Thank you, Kelly. If you would stay with us, one of the other questions we had gotten is about dealer stock purchases. Would you be able to discuss that at all?
Certainly. So, with the supply chain issues that we've had over the course of, the last many years, and as Tim mentioned earlier, it is easing up a little bit, but it is still going to continue to be a challenge. As many of you probably know, 24s we were used to having, the next year model, we were used to having them come out in September, and this year we heard it was going to be November or December, and Ford just released some 24s, and so we are seeing that ease a bit. And that was actually one of the meetings that I had yesterday with one of the motor groups, was about dealer stock. So if they have things on the lot and they are available, that they definitely are for purchase. You need to make sure, though, that they follow within the guidelines of what the contract allows for. If something has a certain number of miles on it, what is the year, make, and model, and if it fits within the guidelines. If you have any questions about specific items on a dealer lot or one of their partner lots, just let me know and I'll be more than happy to walk you through it.
Thanks again, Kelly. We're next moving to a question about the types of vehicles available, and I know Tim went through those and that they're well articulated in the contract user guides. This particular buyer, it was seeking wheelchair accessible cutaways with a capacity of 23 or more riders. Do you know whether or not that's available specifically?
Yeah, so as I mentioned a minute ago, Ford just released some new vehicles that fall into that category. So you need to make sure that you're looking at the right category within the contract user guide. So a lot of people go directly to vans or to 70 vehicles, but for wheelchair accessibility, that is our final category on 110. And you want to make sure that you go directly to the 3 or 4 vendors that fall into that category to check with them on the make and model that's currently available, what the lead time is, and then if there's any other things that might be mandatory versus desired on whatever vehicle you're looking for. So just make sure that you go directly to the wheelchair accessibility category, and that's going to provide you with that size of vehicle that you're looking for.
Hey, we're being asked about upcharges for EVs or traditional fuel or hybrid vehicles. Would you be able to speak to that?
Certainly. If somebody could clarify a little bit more on what they mean by upcharges?
All right, so I'm going to allow some time for that to come in. They were also asking about whether or not the maintenance is wildly less financially than traditional vehicles. I don't know if you or maybe Michelle would want to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle, if she wants to provide some input, that's great. It depends on the vehicle. It depends on the make and model of the vehicle. It depends on the warranty. All of our cars come with basic warranties as well as extended warranty options. You can't do anything that's a third party option, but we do know that some of the maintenance on EVs can be a little bit more costly, and then some of it is less. It just depends on what's being done. When you are picking up your vehicle, they are to go over a complete review with you about the vehicle, provide you with all of the documentation regarding maintenance, as well as basic vehicle operation, whether it's bumper to bumper. Make sure that they cover all of that with you. And if you have any specific questions on certain things, all of our vendors on 110 have to have the ability to service the vehicles that they are selling. So whether it is basic maintenance, or if it is something that is part of an upfitting that you're having done to the vehicle, but they all have to be able to do that. So again, it just depends. Now, in regard to the question on upcharges, you can certainly email me separately, discuss it more in depth if you like, so I can understand exactly what it is you're talking about. I mean, we are definitely seeing some price increases, and I know that Tim had mentioned that a little bit earlier, with the 24s and then moving into 25s. There's a lot of federal charges that are coming through now that are being added. That was another part of the meeting that I had yesterday with our motor groups in regard to that, because I'm trying very hard to be able to put together an up-to-date master vehicle list, because as many of you know, the last one that we have is dated in August, and even some of that information was in flux because there's been it's been very difficult to target pricing for the purchase of vehicles just with the flux of the industry. So just that little tidbit of information as well.
Thank you once again, Kelly. Our next question might be in Michelle's purview. Our buyer is asking why no state agency is offering a level 3 EV charter grant program, not for highways, but within cities and towns for public vehicle fleet charging. Michelle, would you be able to speak to that?
There was a program just like that, the Clean Vehicle Program, about a handful of years ago. They gave $50,000 per site for public fast charging, and that could be put anywhere. It was a little early for that, to be honest. I think we would have gotten more success, had more success if it had been brought about today. And I think that there are programs that are being explored and crafted that will address those kinds of issues exactly. It's just
Definitely.
a
I
little more time.
know LBE is working on, they offer there's a lot of grant options. I know that Michelle had a slide talking about those, and I'm so happy she added that. So thanks, Michelle. But Michelle's absolutely right. They are taking a look at how they can craft and manipulate what we did many years ago and see how it can better fit today's users and the industry and the vehicles that we need to be able to support.
Okay, thank you both. The next question is related to replacement batteries, their cost, and hazardous materials disposal.
So Michelle, do you want to take that?
No, go ahead. You start, Kelly.
So yes, that is an ongoing, I'm not surprised at the question there. That's an ongoing discussion that, OSD is constantly having with our buyers and our vendors. We do have a contract that handles the disposal of hazardous items. So if you want to contact me, we can talk about that a little bit more. There's a lot of discussion out there in the industry about the batteries and exactly, how to handle them. A lot of opinions, as we know, on the batteries as well. So that's something that we're always trying to keep in our purview. Vehicle 110 and 102 don't currently have any additional program within those particular contracts that is focused solely on disposal, but we can certainly provide you with some more options and or answer more questions. If there's something specific that you want to know, you're welcome to contact me directly. And I know my email is in this, and I can provide you with as much information as I have on some options for you.
And in that regard, we have a question about the slides and the recording for today, and that will be forwarded to everyone in attendance today. So you will have ready access to Kelly and our other presenters.
And just a quick thing, Miriam, I just want to remind everybody before the Q&A session comes to a close, please take the brief survey. The link is in the chat. So just take a minute to complete it before you leave. That's it.
Hey, thanks, Jen, for that reminder. We have a question about towns assessing their electrical infrastructure to support chargers, power transformers they're mentioning specifically, and what multiplier we are assuming over current capacity.
So it's interesting that they bring this up, because I actually just had a conversation on Tuesday with some of our utility partners in regard to this. I think that the best thing for you to do is to make sure that your facilities or your DPW teams are very much involved in the planning process within your community or any agency, obviously, and make sure that if you are partnering with your local utilities, that you are very much aware of what your usages in your community, everything from, how many vehicles you need to charge to where those stations are going to be going, and making sure that, you have things laid out properly within the service to your community. There are informational documentation, things like that are available. I think that one of Michelle's slides pointed to that. I also just finished a document yesterday that talks about how to plan and what to consider as you're moving forward. And that is information that I have kind of aggregated from a lot of different sources to add to the contract user guide. And some of that information is in there. So if you'd like to email me, I'm more than happy to forward that to you. And I know, Michelle, if you want to talk any more on that point at all.
I would just add a little bit to that. I would say talk to your utilities about your electric bill, because a lot of times the sustainability coordinators or fleet managers are not the people that see the electric bills or pay the electric bills. And C&I accounts usually have a demand charge associated with them that's a little bit complicated to necessarily explain or understand, but your utility can certainly do so. And that way you're not going to have sticker shock when you just plug in one vehicle for 20 minutes and realize you're paying this exorbitant amount, as opposed to when the charger's being used over and over and over again. That's all.
And if I could tack on to something that Kelly was mentioning in regards to assessing infrastructure support, we also have professional services contracts, which make available consultants who can do that work for you. If you're not don't have the bandwidth to deal with each of the utilities individually, you can certainly hire one of the consultants to have them conduct that survey and provide you that information.
And additionally, sorry, for infrastructure, there are also some turnkey solution providers on VH 102. So if you want to talk to somebody about taking care of the whole thing, your site selection, your planning, your installation, your purchase, all of that, there are companies available that will take care of everything for you.
Exactly. And that's definitely something to think about, because whether you're doing this on your own as a community, whether you are partnering with a utility to do it, or whether you are handling it and partnering with another statewide contract to get it accomplished, just make sure that you're aware of all the partners that you will need for your community.
Well, thank you all for your very comprehensive response. We have a question from Joseph about whether or not there are any state level initiatives to capture vehicle charging sessions. I don't know if that's sessions or stations.
I don't know if he is referring to something that's taking in all the information on all charging as far as what's being done. I'm not sure if that's what he means, or something that's aggregating all this information. I know that there's not, one bank that's receiving all the information, just because we're dealing with utilities, varying communities, and different charging stations. So unless I am not understanding his question.
Okay, Joseph, if you could give us any more clarification, or again, feel free to reach out to our presenters after this session. So at this juncture, I'm not seeing any additional questions. Again, the presentation will be forwarded to everyone in attendance today, so you can always reach out to us as further questions come forward. So at this juncture, Jen, I believe I'm turning it back over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for your very insightful questions. That was really awesome. And thank you to all the presenters. If there is nothing else, before we leave, again, we might leave this session open for a couple of minutes. I believe we can do that. If you haven't had an opportunity to fill out the survey, please take a minute to do so. But on behalf of OSD, I just want to thank you all for attending today's webinar. And we hope you found it to be informative and helpful. So happy holidays.